I just decided that actually this is not going to work, and I dropped out of law school and I went into another sort of course in the middle of that year, and then eventually I went into accounting. Hi guys, welcome back to Yanga Today and welcome back to another video. Hope you guys are doing well. For anyone who is seeing my face for the first time, my name is Yanga, and in this specific video I basically want to chat to you guys about a couple of things that I know now that I am in my 30s, but these are things that I actually wish I knew when I was in my 20s. And the reason why I wanted to really make this video, number one, is because I'm sure there's a lot of people in their 20s who are trying to sort of navigate that very, very interesting decade. And if you know me, you know that my 20s were a pretty challenging time in my life for various reasons. But I do think that the things that I know now would have probably made it a little bit easier for me to navigate that decade. And so I think it'll be a really sort of invaluable video for someone who is still navigating their 20s. But if you are 30, 31, navigating your 30s and maybe even 40s, okay, I do think that there are certain things that will be applicable in this video to you as well. And as much as I have learned these type of lessons, I still sort of need to remind myself of these truths that have really helped me in my 30s and have really changed how I approach life and overall made me a happier person. So if you are interested in finding out what I would do differently in my 20s now that I am in my 30s, then please stay tuned for the rest of this video. So point number one kicks off with essentially the first thing for me is that in my 20s, I wish I knew and understood that I don't have to have it all figured out. A little bit of a story just to illustrate this point. When I kicked off my varsity career, I actually enrolled for law. So I had enrolled for a BCom law, and I thought that I was going to have this great career in the legal profession. And I just decided that actually this is not going to work, and I dropped out of law school and I went into another sort of course in the middle of that year, and then eventually I went into accounting. So it was a little bit of a scenic route, but at the time it felt as though I was not serious about my life, because now you need to update your family and tell them that, okay guys, I know that I came here to study law, but it's just not working out, and I think I want to pivot and things like that. And I think what made it worse at the time is that I actually had a law bursary as well from the university. And then I was thinking of all of these things that essentially now I am going to let go of that funding and try and jump into another qualification, and you just feel like you're not serious about life. At least I did, because I've always been such a focused person that experience for me was very unsettling, and it did something to my confidence, which was not too great. But retrospectively thinking about it now, I wish I realized that I don't have to have this figured out. This is the first time I'm in varsity. This is the first time I'm being exposed to different types of courses. And so that for me is just something that I apply in my 30s, because there are going to be moments, even now that I'm in my 30s, where I'm just like, okay, I'm not sure if this is going to work. I'm not sure if this makes sense. But I try to remind myself that, Yanga, you don't have to have this all figured out. You just need to take the next step, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do after we've taken that next step. And then the second thing that I wish I knew in my 20s, that I definitely know now that I'm in my 30s, is that no one is actually thinking about you. This is a principle or a concept that I actually came across some years ago when I was reading a very brilliant book titled Big Magic. I've actually spoken about this book on this channel before. And I think when you're in your 20s, naturally, you're sort of looking at your peers and sort of trying to unpack how are they navigating this tricky decade of your 20s, when there's so many things going on. You're trying to get your first degree, you're trying to get your second degree, you're trying to get your first job, you're in a relationship, there's a lot of things that are going on, and you seem to think that everyone is thinking about you as Uyanga. What is Yanga up to? Where is she now in her career? Where is she? And the truth of the matter is, if you actually unpack it and you actually think about it, most of the time during the day, just any given day, you're probably thinking about your own dreams, you're thinking about your own vision for your life, you're thinking about your own problems, you're thinking about the things that you need to do. It's very rare that your attention is fragmented so much that it is constantly thinking about other people. And that is true for other people as well. And that is basically saying that no one is thinking about you as much as you think that they are thinking about you. And I think if we then realize that truth, that there's no such thing as people obsessing over your life and the mistakes that you are making, it would actually give you a lot of freedom to just live life authentically and live life the way that is true to you, because you're not sort of wondering, oh, what is this person going to say? Because no one cares essentially about what it is that you are doing and things like that. So that is something that I understand now in my 30s, that when I make the decisions that I make, if they make sense to me, then I'm good to go. This second point actually ties in nicely with the third thing that has really become very true to me in my 30s and that I understand quite nicely, and that is do not ask for permission. In my 20s, I think I was someone who really was, to a large degree, a people pleaser, and you wanted to make sure that people are comfortable with the decisions that you're making, or the decisions that you are making make sense to other people, and you sort of reach out to people and you say, oh, this is what I'm thinking of doing, or I'm thinking of changing from this to that, what do you think about it? And when people give us feedback that you know doesn't necessarily align with what we actually wanted, then it makes us feel uncomfortable essentially. And for me in my 30s, I just don't ask for permission anymore. If there is something that I am thinking of doing, I just go ahead and do it. Of course, seeking counsel is important, and I'll still do that to a degree, but why you are doing that is really important. You can do that because you're genuinely trying to see where your blind spots might be. Because if you seek counsel, especially from people who are just like, I don't know, they know what they're talking about. If it's a very specific question that you have and you're seeking counsel from that specific person, that person might add a lot of insight and color in where you might have had blind spots. But I think most of the time, especially in our 20s, when we do reach out to people and we're asking for their opinions and things like that, we're doing it from a place of validation. We want them to give us that stamp of approval to say that, yeah, I think this is a great idea. You should totally go for it. Not realizing that people, as much as they may care for us, but most of the time they can be speaking from a place of their own fears, and then those fears are then projected onto you. So now that I am in my 30s, I very rarely consult. I might update someone and say, hey, this is what I am busy with. Or I might reach out to someone and ask, what do you think about this? But I'm not doing it from a place of wanting that person to validate what's in my mind or validate my decision. I'm just basically seeking some advice so that my decision is as informed as could possibly be. So that's something that I would say, if you're in your 20s, try and practice. Just being someone who does not need to ask for permission before they do something. The next thing that I wish I knew in my 20s, or that I practiced better in my 20s, that I do quite well now, is outside of God, do not tie your identity to anything. This is definitely easier said than done, and I can empathize with anyone who struggles with this, especially if you are in your 20s, because like I said, that specific time in your life, there's so many things that are happening, and because it's a time that has a lot of newness, you're sort of inclined to attach your identity to this newness. And uh, everything about you now revolves around this specific identity. The reason why this is so dangerous is because we never know essentially what the future holds for us. And in a future where that thing that you've attached your identity to is no longer there, then you might find yourself spiraling out of control and experiencing deep grief, because now who you are is no longer alive, because what you attached your identity to is no longer there. And I think for me, that is something that in my 30s I'm constantly trying to remind myself of. I'm trying to constantly remind myself that there's me, there's Yanga, and there's God, and that is where my identity needs to come from. And I think why having God as an anchor point for your identity, why it makes so much sense and it's so important, is because God is not a shifting element in your life. He's not going to not be God tomorrow. He's not going to shift in his character the next day. And this is basically a principle for me that anchors my life. And I think it can save you a lot of heartache and a lot of disappointment as well. At some point in my life, I left a job. And when I left that specific role, I didn't necessarily leave it with something in my hands. And it was a very risky moment. But what helped me through that specific moment is that it wasn't a job that my identity was entrenched in. It was just a job. I did not now have my identity wrapped up in this specific role. So when the job was no longer there, I didn't necessarily fall apart. So be careful when it comes to attaching your identity to certain things. Like I said, as people, we just don't know what the future holds. That goes for relationships. You're in a relationship, you want that relationship to last for a very long time. It may, but people get married and then the marriage doesn't work out. And if you've always tied your identity to, I want to be a husband, I want to be a wife, and that reality is stripped from you, then you're going to find yourself in a very, very dangerous place of grieving what is no longer that, or grieving who you thought you were and not being that person. So that's not to say that you shouldn't be grateful and excited about the things that you achieve in your life and the reality that you find yourself in. It's important, right? But I do believe that the more you find identity in something outside of you that can change, the more of a dangerous terrain you're in. Because when that specific thing is no longer there, then you're going to obviously experience a lot of pain. And I think that's something in our 20s that we don't necessarily think about. So that's definitely something that I have an appreciation for now that I'm in my 30s, that I wish I had had a little bit more of an appreciation for in my 20s. And then the last point that I have is basically to say that your 20s are the perfect time for taking calculated risks. So I want to say the operative word here is calculated. Like, it's good to take risks, but the risks also need to be within certain reasonable parameters to some degree. So do your research. But your 20s are such a prime time to take those calculated risks, because there's there's less to lose if things don't go accordingly than there is the older that you get. The older that you get, obviously, there's going to be more responsibilities. Maybe in your 30s, you start having children. In your 30s, you're now married. In your 30s, you have a bond to pay. You've got bills, you've got cars. There's a lot that can go on the older that you get, which means taking certain types of risks becomes a little bit more tricky. So in your 20s, you want to focus less on being a perfectionist, which is something that I really, really battled with in my 20s. I was such a perfectionist, and I hate to say it, but there's certain things that, or certain opportunities that I didn't go for because I was scared. What if it doesn't work out? But there's very little to lose in your 20s. And I'm not saying, again, be completely reckless and make unreasonable decisions and take strange risks. But I've taken quite a number of risks in my life, and it's just so important to do that when you still have that room, that wiggle room, that leg room to sort of exercise taking that risk. Because if it works out, then chances are the return on that is going to be more than you could have ever imagined. It's going to be an exponential return. But if it doesn't, there's also going to be a lesson in that. And the downside is something that you'll probably be able to recover from because you still have time on your side. So for me, I would say that if you're in your 20s, try not to play it too safe And this also ties into some of the points that I mentioned earlier, where you want people's permission or you want people to give you that validation. If you want to take a little bit of an unconventional route in your life, you still have time to recover. So make those decisions that are not necessarily the safest route, because you still have time to make up for it if it doesn't go the right way. So yeah, those are essentially for me some of the things I wish I knew or realized in my 20s that I definitely realize now in my 30s, and I constantly keep at the back of my mind. So I hope that you have enjoyed this specific video, and I'd love to know, for anyone who is, in their 30s plus, what is that one thing for you that you now sort of have a good understanding or an appreciation for, that you wish you had an appreciation for in your 20s. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.